All right, guys, so today is a very big day. Movers are coming tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to move all of this stuff here out of the old shop to the new shop. And as you can probably tell, I haven't done really anything to get prepared. It's been just super crazy. Been trying to work on the new shop and the tiny house. And so today I need to get some stuff packed up so that once the movers show up tomorrow morning, I can be a little bit more prepared. So unfortunately, the big limiting factor moving out of this shop, and the same when we moved in, are these dang single person entry doors. So I only have 36 inches of clearance there. So that means I unfortunately have to take a lot of stuff apart, and that makes this moving process a lot slower. For instance, the table saw, I have to take off all of the rails because otherwise it is too wide to fit through that door. Obviously, I got to take the miter saw station completely apart. Luckily, it breaks down into a bunch of individual cabinets. And the one thing I am pretty nervous about, because I built it here, after moving in, is my big 4x8 Avid CNC. I need to stop talking to the camera and get to work, so be prepared for a lot of time lapses and packing montages. So let's go ahead and get started.
I started by getting the easiest, largest stuff out of the way first, staging everything for the movers in the front kind of foyer area outside the office. Of course, even the vacuum with the boom arm was too tall for this door opening, but with a little help, I was able to get it out of the door. Next up was my 20-inch planer, and I luckily only had to remove the table height adjustment wheel to get this guy through the door, and thankfully it also has built-in wheels, making it pretty easy to move. The drum sander was next, and I needed to remove the infeed table to make it fit, which was easily removed by taking off a few Allen bolts. And the drum sander also has built-in wheels, so it was, again, pretty easy to move. I have a mobile base on my bandsaw, so that was pretty simple to get out the door once I disconnected the dust collection and packed up the various accessories for the saw. So I've had this Rockler mobile base for my drill press for going on a year at this point, and I figured now was the time to finally get it installed. And after assembling the base, I just tipped the drill press onto the base, and then I could wheel it away. So much easier than trying to wrestle the drill press up onto a moving dolly like I did when I moved into this shop. I also packed up my drill press cabinet and bit index while I was at it, and got those out of my way. Next, I got all my Festool Systainers stacked up and moved out of my assembly table to lighten the load a bit, and then I could move my assembly table out of the way with the Rockler workbench casters. And this assembly table is too wide to get through the door, but I could at least get it kind of more out of my way. Finally, I packed up my finishing supply cabinet, and that was about as far as I got before the movers arrived the next day. So just like my last move, I insisted on a liftgate truck, as it makes moving large power tools, even ones with mobile bases, much easier and safer. And the movers did have a second truck with a ramp where we loaded other odds and ends, but if you have to move your shop, I can't recommend a liftgate truck enough. So we got this first trip unloaded at the new shop, stuffing as much as possible into the spray room, which I'm using as basically a storage unit for the time being, and then it was back to the old shop to keep packing. I got the dust collection system packed up next, and I was so glad I had splurged on the Nordfab ductwork as it came apart unbelievably fast. While we're working, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning, wants to explore their creativity, and learn new skills. Skillshare has classes on everything from photography and illustration to graphic design, music, and more, and they're a great resource for freelancers and entrepreneurs looking to learn new skills. As a professional content creator, I am always learning new software and skills, and lately I've been working on improving the color grading in my videos using the Color Grading Introduction with a Pro Colorist class by Fred Trevino. I've also been having a little fun with the Jazz Piano Ultimate Beginners course by Arthur Bird, trying to channel my inner Sebastian from La La Land. So if you're interested in joining Skillshare, the first 1,000 people to use the link in the video description or my code, Craft Your Workshop, will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, and new classes launch each week, so there's always something new to discover. Thanks to the folks at Skillshare for sponsoring this week's video, and let's get back to work. Finally, the time had come to deal with the thing I had been dreading moving since I purchased my new shop space, my Avid CNC. So I'd already removed the electronics boxes off camera, and next I got the gantry separated from the rest of the CNC, which is how the folks at Avid recommend moving the CNC. We moved the gantry out of the way, and then we could get the beast up onto some dollies to move it closer to the door out of the shop. Unfortunately, to get it out of the doors leading outside, we needed to turn the CNC onto its side, and we got a dolly clamped to one of the legs in preparation for this. With my Harbor Freight hydraulic lift table at the other end, we wrestled the CNC up onto its side and then started the arduous process of getting it through the door. And this was easier said than done, and of course, my mic died right before this, so I've got no audio here unfortunately, but I think it'd just be a bunch of beeping anyway. And I did end up having to remove the feet from the CNC to get it through the door, but once that was done, we finally got it through, slowly but surely. Also, as you might be able to see, my little homemade dolly was falling apart as we moved, and we were down to one wheel on the dolly by the time we got the CNC outside. Thankfully, we did get it outside, and then we could lay the CNC back down and get it loaded onto the truck. And this was a surprisingly simple process with the combination of the lift gate on the truck and the Harbor Freight lift table, and we just took our time and got the CNC loaded in little by little. We got the rest of the truck filled up with the gantry and other odds and ends, and then it was off to the new shop to unload the CNC. And this was pretty much the same process in reverse, except now, thankfully, we had a 10x10 door to move in through, so we didn't need to turn the CNC on its side. We also had my electric pallet jack to help out this time, which made things much easier. And with that, we wrapped up the day with the movers.
All right, guys, so as you can see, got pretty much all of the big stuff moved out of the shop last Friday. So very exciting to have all of that behind me. The CNC was particularly worrying, but as you guys saw, it actually went pretty smoothly. Definitely not done working in here though, obviously. Have some odds and ends left, but then because of the crazy cost of materials right now, if you guys have bought a 2x4 or a sheet of plywood lately, I'm sure you'll know that this stuff is way more expensive than it should be. I'm gonna take all this stuff apart and bring it with me. If you guys have been following along since I kind of built out this space, you'll know that I put in all of these plywood walls, all of the framing behind those walls, some soundproofing insulation, all of the electrical. So we put everything together with screws because this is a rental. I knew there was a potential that I might want to take this stuff with me in the future, and I'm really glad we did because I do. So we're gonna be spending a lot of time taking everything apart in here, but the nice thing is I'll be able to reuse a lot of this material, especially the plywood, over at the new shop because I'm going to be building walls in front of concrete block walls just like I did here. So first I need to go ahead and take down all of the odds and ends that are still actually on the wall, and then we'll start removing the trim, and then we can start getting the panels down.
We started working on the left side of the shop and got the Craftsman VersaTrack system removed from the metalworking area, and then started removing the rest of the odds and ends from the wall. Next, we got the French cleat trim pulled off, and then I could start removing the plywood panels. And these were held on with trim head screws, so it was a little tricky finding all the screws I needed to remove because they were kind of buried in the plywood, but I eventually got in a rhythm and started getting panels removed pretty quickly. Next, we got the baseboard removed, and then we could start pulling down the full sheets, and it's crazy to think that each one of these panels costs about $50 right now. It's just totally nuts how expensive building materials are. Next, we got the fiber cement panels removed from the metalworking area, and I'm not sure how necessary these were in retrospect, as I really don't think I would have lit these walls on fire with my welding or angle grinding. I got my French cleat wall taken apart next, and this thing has been awesome for organization, but also as a background for filming my videos. We got the plywood rack taken apart next, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use these brackets again in the new shop, as I think I want the supports a little bit closer together so there isn't as much wasted space, but I guess we'll see. With that, the right wall was cleared off, so we could start removing the plywood, and we really got into a good rhythm here and started getting these walls taken apart super quickly. Once the plywood was down, we started removing and stacking up the soundproofing insulation, which I definitely wanted to bring to the new shop, as it could be used to soundproof the CNC room, as well as the closet for the dust collector, among other things. I also started demoing the electrical, as I can reuse all of these outlets and potentially even some of the Romex and outlet boxes. We continued removing insulation and demoing electrical, and before we knew it, we had this wall back to the studs. Now, I'm not planning on reusing a lot of these fasteners, as I'm kind of worried about the heads on the trim head screws stripping after being driven, then removed, then driven again. And because of this, we had a wasteland of screws on the floors of the old shop. So I picked up a new tool to help clean this up, a magnetic sweep, and I'm not sure why it's taken me so long to buy one of these. This thing worked amazingly well, and once the magnet was loaded up with screws, I could just set the sweep on a box and disengage the magnet to drop the screws. Super cool. With the floors cleaned up a bit, it was finally time to start taking apart the walls, and again, because we use screws for everything, this was a surprisingly easy process. And after removing the concrete screws tying the walls to the slab, we could just lower the sections to the floor and get them taken apart, which went super quick as it was as simple as removing some screws. And we kept the studs organized as we went, separating the pressure-treated bottom plates, the 10-foot studs, and the 12-foot studs and top plates into stacks so that they'd be easier to reuse at the new shop. We also ended up saving the 3-inch deck screws which we assembled these walls with, as I thought they could more easily be reused in the future. Before we knew it, the right wall was done, and we could then repeat the entire process on the left wall, starting by removing the insulation and electrical. Once that was done, we could start taking down the wall sections, and this was a little more slow going as I had to reattach the line set and drainage line running from the front mini split unit as I went. This was simple enough though, and we were able to get the rest of this wall disassembled by the end of the day. And it was kind of crazy to take a step back and see the shop looking more and more like it did when I moved in a few years ago. The work was far from done though, as now we needed to get all these materials moved over to the new shop. And we started with the insulation since it was the most miserable thing to move, and we filled the majority of a 17-foot U-Haul truck with this insulation. Now this was a ton of work, but I did the math and we removed about 1,800 square feet of soundproofing insulation, which has a retail value of over $1,800, so I think it was worth it. Once the insulation was moved, we got the plywood and framing loaded up, and I also did the math on this material, and this stuff is super expensive right now. So in total, we removed 53 sheets of 1/2-inch plywood, 52 10-foot long 2x4s, 66 12-foot long 2x4s, and 10 pressure-treated 12-foot long 2x4s. And the current price of this material would be right around $4,500. So in total, with the insulation, we brought with us about $6,300 of materials, and it only took us about 3 days of work to remove it. Anyway, we weren't quite done yet once everything was unloaded back at the new shop, as there were still more things to pack up. So we started by finishing up the partition wall and then moved on to the acoustic panels, which I should be able to use in the addition in the new shop. Finally, with pretty much everything out of the shop area, I could get the American Green Lights LED shop lights uninstalled, and I was definitely taking these with me as I'll be installing them in the attic space in the new shop. And I waited until the very end to remove these so we didn't have to work in the dark, but finally the time had come to remove them. Once that was done, I got the entry door to the shop removed, and then last but certainly not least, we could get the office packed up. And I did decide to leave the front office area mostly intact, as I figured tearing out the drywall wasn't worth the effort, plus the mini split units would have been incredibly expensive to have moved professionally. Also, I had to run some conduit for the Romex running to the office, just to bring it back up to code now that the walls were gone. And with that done, the shop move and demo was officially a wrap, and it was definitely kind of weird seeing the old shop back in its original state. Of course, now the new shop was a total mess, and now we'd have to work around all of my stuff, but at least the big move was behind me and I could focus on the new shop. All right, I think that's where I'm gonna wrap up this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I realize it's a little different than the rest of the videos in this shop renovation series, but obviously moving out was a huge step in this process, and being able to salvage all of that material was huge. I've already put it to really good use. I used a lot of that material to frame this CNC room, which is directly behind the camera, as well as a big part of this work platform. So that's been great, and obviously I still have all that insulation and plywood to put up once we get to insulating this place. So as you might be able to see behind me, we've been working on getting the steel supports fabricated and installed in these wall systems to help brace these concrete walls, and that's what I'm going to be covering in next week's video. So if you guys don't want to miss that, go ahead and get subscribed and ring the notification bell. Also, as always, I'll have links to all the tools and materials I use down in the video description below. And last, if you want to support me, I sell merch. I have plans available for a lot of my woodworking projects, and I have both Patreon and YouTube memberships set up, so go check those out. All right, thanks for watching, y'all, and until next week, happy building.